All right, you happily miserable accursed. It's Herle here with Scott and Jordan and Kory. A little bit of a tough weekend in the Herle house, so I want to say a few words off the top about Ken Dryden. Ken has been a hero to me my whole life. In fact, my very first sports hero. As a 9-year-old in Saskatchewan, watching him materialize out of nowhere 6 games before the 1971 playoffs to lead the Habs to one of their most improbable Stanley Cup victories. 6'4", impossibly long limbs, the coolest mask there was. He instantly broke every mold about what a goalie was or could be. And then 30 years later, when he became not just a colleague, but a friend, as a deeply committed parliamentarian and cabinet minister in Paul Martin's government, and we kept in touch ever since. Public education, national child care, concussion safety. When Ken turned his mind to an issue, change happened and progress was made. The author of The Game, one of the greatest sports books of all time, scholar, educator, lawyer, Summit Series champion, social justice advocate, broadcaster and producer, team executive, leader. 6 Stanley Cups, a Conn Smythe, a Calder Trophy, and 5 Vezinas in only 8 years in the NHL. A legendary Canadian, and my hero. I'll have a milkshake and a cheeseburger in your honor, Ken, and it was far too fucking soon. All right. I presume we'll get into this in our Hey Yous, so I'll just carry on. Here's the rundown for today. We're talking about last week's Liberal Cabinet Planning Forum and Friday's strategic measures announcement. See how that went over, both the substance of it and the communications of it, which I'm particularly interested in. Affordability, not tariffs. Our cursed clipping is Shannon Proudfoot's piece in the Globe on the Prime Minister's post-election set of problems. And Pierre Poilievre wants to scrap the temporary foreign workers program, and we'll talk about the politics of that. And finally, Mr. Pinsent and our Hey Yous. So, team, good weekend?
Good weekend.
Yeah, I was in Montreal, actually, this weekend.
Yeah, having fun, I presume?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I was. It's a housewarming party and went out for a nice dinner with friends. It was good.
You live like an adult. I live like a dad. I spent summer's over, man, and my weekend, in addition to receiving the terrible news about Ken, which we'll talk about later, was back in the arena, back on the rink, back on the ball diamond. So we had 3 practices and 2 baseball games. And so, there you are, the old man standing on the sideline screaming as insanely as possible at a well-meaning 12-year-old kid who hasn't picked up a bat since June. Jesus Christ, Ryan, that's above your fucking head. What's wrong with you? And then I look around and people are thinking, what's wrong with that man, actually?
So relaxing.
Yeah.
Children's sports. Love it.
Back in the swing room. We did net 2 victories, so that was a good thing. So
well, I notice you're not on the edge of your seat to give us an update on the Who concert.
Okay, I'm going to tell you what. I know you're full of I know you're full of cynicism. My son Will and I went to see the Who on Thursday night at Budweiser Stage. We anticipated a grisly nursing home spectacle, and yes, they're old. And Daltrey does not move much anymore. But I will say this.
He's 81. Started. You won't move at all.
He barely moved. And when he did move, it got into trouble. He had the microphone kind of hit him a couple times and stuff. But his voice, when he opens that aged old trap of his and lets loose, he can still sing. His voice was still stunningly powerful. And they blew the roof off, and it's a roofless joint. So that's saying something on Love, Rain, or
That's actually not saying much, Scott, is if you're keeping your metaphor straight. To blow the roof off the Budweiser place is perhaps the easiest thing to do.
I think the opposite. It means that he has altered the very atmosphere. He's very shaken the earth. Anyway, his voice was powerful. My son Will was like, I can't believe this. I expected it was going to be.
He likes meatloaf.
Listen, the kid has
David,
good taste.
Let Scott have his heroes here.
Jesus Christ.
But I was like, it was it was packed with old people, man.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I got to go to a young concert.
I hardly have to remind anyone it's wildfire season, eh? For me, there were more than a few mornings on the lake this summer when I woke up to a lyric from Deep Purple in my head. Dun, 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 dun. You know the one. Statistically, it's been the second worst season in Canadian history. But there is some hope. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, a trusted ally and collaborator in community safety and environmental protection in Canada, is working to move our wildfire response efforts forward through cutting-edge tech, like investing in Dryad's early warning systems for wildfire detection. These are solar-powered sensors that provide real-time monitoring and data on environmental conditions. When they're paired with TELUS's high-speed communications networks, it means government agencies can respond fast and decisively. They also employ advanced analytics to predict fire behavior, which helps identify high-risk areas and optimize resource deployment. In the terrible Jasper wildfires just over a year ago, TELUS quickly deployed helicopters to refuel critical cell towers, which meant uninterrupted communication for emergency services. It's all added up to $125 million in investments for emergency planning and response, helping to protect our communities and preserve our ecosystems. So, TELUS is more than a technology provider here. They bring strategic support to help government and responders achieve their goals in how we fight, manage, and prevent more wildfires. And because it's TELUS, there'll be future innovations too. Find out more at telus.com/social impact. Kory,
Yes.
the people that I know in the government, in the federal government, in the Mark Carney government, tell me that what we see of the government is the tip of the iceberg, that this government is working flat out hard, that everybody in it's working much harder than they'd ever worked under Justin Trudeau. And there are amazing things happening and big things coming together. They had a planning retreat. People tell me, my God, the conversations, deep, substantive, serious, complex, etc. And then on Friday, the Prime Minister, out of the retreat planning forum, announced a series of measures to support workers and Canadian businesses. What I'm most interested in is what these people tell me privately. I see no evidence of publicly. And I am, as a voter, left, this is not being shared with me. And I'm wondering what is going on. And then they dumped so much stuff without any real framing or preconditioning around it that I'm actually wondering what anybody heard out of Friday. Like, I don't know if somebody hadn't heard anything about it and came up to me and said, "What did they announce on Friday?" I'd have a difficult time repeating it.
Well, I have trouble disagreeing with any of that, David. I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes on the policy side. Maybe it is as great as what's been intimated to you, but the comms, kind of like their election campaign, is an F fucking minus performance. Like, if you're going to make a bunch of announcements as they did on Friday, like as you say, why would you do them all on the same day? Why would you not have some context around it? I saw the leak in the Globe and Mail on major projects, where Ontario gets 1/16 of them and not the ones they asked for. Like, go fuck yourself. I don't know. I just don't see a lot of attention to the stuff that actually makes your government popular or last long. And if they don't figure out the comms and the marketing and the campaigning side of this, it's going to be a short-lived experience for them. It really is, because the amount of goodwill that the government had going into or coming out of the campaign, I think, was very high. But this is really difficult times. It looks like we're sliding into a recession. We have very high youth unemployment. We'll be talking about that shortly. We've got Emperor Cheeto south of the border, who's creating chaos every day on the news. It's a big moment to rise to, and you better get your comms shit together if you want to be able to bring the country, behind you and get this stuff done. I think you've heard many other people talk about some of the challenges that some of this stuff is going to present, be it with the courts, be it with public opinion. Not everyone's going to love some of these projects and things that are happening. We're going to have a tough love budget by all accounts that is going to need some very careful communication. And I see no evidence of care in any of it. I see chaos. I see improvisation. I see amateurism, and we saw a lot, frankly, of that in the campaign. So I don't know. Who's to say?
Right. Jordan, do you have a more charitable take on this?
I don't actually. And I agree with most of what Kory has said there. And I think what was interesting to me is the way that for what little comms framing there was of the cabinet, I'm going to call it a retreat, um, is it's really like they've moved into the accept the things we cannot change phase of the trade war. But that's not really where Canadians are at. And so there's just, to me, it seemed like such a gap between the way they understood what they were putting forward in that announcement on Friday, which was so overstuffed and muddled in its communications that there was really nothing that floated to the top. I mean, maybe you could say if you were a casual observer, they were sort of padding the delay on the EV mandate stuff that did float to the top. But what is the
least
message?
Important part of the announcement?
Well,
perhaps,
that's it,
right?
exactly. And that was allowed to float to the top. The fact that the list of projects was leaked simultaneously, which was sure to just generate a number of negative reactions, regardless of what quarter you're in. Is your project on the list or off of the list? Are these projects supported by Indigenous communities or not? Is there enough? Is everyone getting the right slice of the pie regionally? So it's nothing but bad news, right, to float like such a large draft list. So I think it was, to me, the thing that seems to be going on there is maybe even a little bit more dangerous than what Kory's suggesting. Because I think Kory talked a lot about how there's communications inexperience or maybe incompetence in some of these things. But I saw something else in that announcement on Friday, which was the idea that sort of like clever policy and online platforms to upskill people are going to get us out of what's about to fucking punch us in the face. And it's just not realistic that that's the case, nor is it realistic to assume that Canadians are going to feel that that's the case, as we're now entering into the period where the impacts of this trade war are going to be felt most acutely outside of the targeted sectors. And we already saw that a little bit with the jobs numbers that came out for August. So 66,000 jobs gone. And now we're starting to lose jobs in the core working ages. So this is everything up until now. Businesses were holding out. They were trying to keep people employed. They were trying to wait and see if we could get a deal, if we could get these tariffs lifted. And now that is ending. And so it's about to become much more difficult. And what I would see looking at that package of announcements is a couple trends that I think should be worrying, particularly for a government that leaned a lot on progressive voters to get elected. It's misunderstanding the scale of potential unemployment that we might be facing and the disruption that is, and the complete inadequacy of our current EI system to get people actually back to work and jobs they might want. And it's also, again, like this, we're going to talk more about this, but moving into the fall budget as an austerity budget. There's a real clash coming up about who are the winners and losers in the spending that does happen in that budget. And if it feels to Canadians who are now being squeezed and feeling pressure and feeling uncertain more than ever, that somehow it's private companies or it's folks that are not them that are winning out of these investments, then that's also going to be a recipe for disaster for this government. But the comms absolutely was not clean, and I don't think it helped them.
So, as the air you breathe has been reminding you, this has been a severe wildfire season. We are well past Labor Day, but dozens of large fires are still burning out of control in BC, and new ones have been erupting. Manitoba has declared states of emergency twice this season, and it's been bad in Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, Newfoundland and Labrador, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. Severe, it appears, is now normal. Canada is so vast that many of these fires can only be left to burn themselves out. But those that threaten communities and the economic corridors that run through them must be fought and contained. All summer, our sponsor, CN, has been in the thick of that fight. In the past few years, CN has created a firefighting fleet. Its big three are Poseidon, Trident, and Neptune. Fire trains equipped with pumps, hoses, water cannon, and high surveillance cameras. They can move fast to remote locations their tracks run through and deliver water, foam, fire retardant. They arrive at fires along the rail right-of-way crewed by specially trained CN railroaders. And this year, the capacity of each train has been doubled from 50,000 to 100,000 gallons. In July, when a fast-moving wildfire threatened Piers, Alberta, Neptune showed up within hours, supporting local responders and turning its powerful onboard cannons on the flames. Residents credited the rapid response with saving their homes. During the horrifying destruction in Jasper last year, CN's fleet delivered millions of gallons of water, bolstering official efforts. The expansion of the CN firefighting fleet continues. 2 nimble rapid response fire cars, Oceanus and Amphitrite, were added this year. Water trailers are being installed along tracks in arid, remote locations. And CN's firefighting railroaders learn as they work. They adapt, they become more effective. As I said, we can probably expect summer after summer of flames and smoke. But the communities along CN's vast network can also expect Trident, Poseidon, Neptune, Oceanus, Amphitrite, and their crews to be doing overwatch. That's a promise. Scott, one of the things I thought really did work for the Liberals during the campaign was the fact that Carney seemed to be good at explaining things. He obviously understood what he was talking about, and he would have extended discussions with journalists and scrums where he would literally explain the thinking, explain what was going on, and it provided me with a lot of confidence. I'm not getting that anymore, even from him. Like I um, uh, really don't feel like I just want to echo what Kory said. I just don't feel like that government has a narrative of any kind. And to echo Jordan, if it does have a narrative, it's about 180 degrees off of David Coletto's priorities list.
Yeah. Well, I think a bunch of things. I'm in broad agreement. I might not be quite as severe as everyone else, or at least I'm not prepared to be as severe this soon. Although I concur that early indications are not encouraging, frankly, in terms of developing a narrative and communicating stuff. And I think a couple things. First, I wonder if part of it is the difference between the Prime Minister's office and the office of the Prime Minister. Prime Minister's office is an organ that exists in the middle of the government, and it runs not just the Prime Minister, it runs the government of Canada. And it does short-term planning, it does issues management, it intervenes with ministers where they see weakness, it coordinates ministers where it sees strengths, it develops a narrative, it reinforces that narrative. It is responsible for the government as an entire unit, as a thing that exists and is led by the Prime Minister, but not as wholly a function of the Prime Minister. Whereas the office of the Prime Minister sounds like it's the Prime Minister and a series of secretaries who were there to make certain that his dry cleaning is picked up and that papers are placed on his desk in the morning. And I worry, and again, I'm sounding severe and I'm talking to agree about things I don't know because I don't have a peek inside the operation these days. But I worry that distinction, that very rhetorical distinction that I'm making, is actually a functional challenge, right? That there is not a PMO mentality, there is an Office of the Prime Minister mentality. One of the problems with that is that I think Carney might be a big part of the issue here. I don't know that Carney has a frame of reference that allows him to. He has his personal talent and ability has taken him so far. Like, I mean, my God, Trudeau was dead and gone. The Liberals are going to be buried. Now he's the Prime Minister. He wins an election. And so you look at it all and you say, well, who in hell are you to offer criticism? But his frame of reference is as a central bank governor. And if you think about it, a central bank governor's world is organized around a couple of monthly interventions, the words of which are poured over with incredible incredible scrutiny by not just reporters, but financial analysts who are looking and report upon and debate and extend the meaning of those words and the consequence and significance of them. And I listened to the entirety. I had to tail his news conference. So I listened to it. And I think that Carney was trying to present what you're talking about. I think if you take a look at the measures, right, it was a 9-point plan. There were a series of long-term incentives. Now, we can debate whether they're the right ones and all that sort of stuff. Like I lack the policy expertise to be able to say, but you can see if you watch the entire 25 minutes of his news conference, he was saying, listen, we are facing a fundamental structural change. It ain't going back. He echoed some of that language from the campaign and, picks up on the current context, which is like, listen, despite all our shuttles down to Washington, like, don't assume that there's going to be a shortcut out of this thing. We are facing a fundamental, deep global restructuring, and we are in the midst of it and being sideswiped by it. So there's a whole series of long-term incentives and structural investments to try to sort of help manage that, thinking about stuff that we'll want to do and that will bear fruit 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And then there's a series of short-term measures, whether it's supporting workers that are hit and hard hit, that are struck in hard hit sectors, or whether it's, working to try to address the specific tariffs from China on canola, again, of which some of the specifics some people have been critical of. But like, there was an integrated plan. It made sense. And he did take some time to explain it in that newser. The challenge is this: from a comms perspective, from a presentation perspective, as you guys are saying, the PMO did not invest time, it seems to me, in building in anticipation of this planning retreat, planning forum retreat, whatever the fuck you want to call it. If your number one communications priority is to distinguish what the label of the thing is as compared to the past, then you're off, right? They didn't establish, like, we didn't hear the word plan other than free, sex, and new. The most powerful word in marketing is plan, particularly political marketing. And so we should have been hearing about the fact that there was going to be an integrated multi-layer plan, that it addresses near-term, short-term, that it's going to address east and west sectors that are manufacturing and sectors that are agriculture, that it's going to be workers and that it's going to be macro economic, but it's also going to be boots and laces and where people live. And I don't think that framing was there. And so the degree to which the speech that he actually gave and the measures that he actually outlined tried to talk about that, it didn't get poured over in the same way that his words would when he talked about guidance on the next interest rate cut. And so I think they've got to make some real structural adjustments of their own in terms of the way they develop narrative and the way they harness him. And I think he's got to permit that. He's got to know what good is in this new job, in this new responsibility as communicator in chief, and make certain that his office is in a position to harness and unleash that.
Right.
I'm not sure anybody there does politics or campaigning or marketing. Yeah. Like, I don't see it. Like,
I'm not prepared to say that. I mean, some of those people do. Some I don't know, but I'm not prepared to just say, well, they're dummies.
I think it was such an interesting choice when you consider that they are clearly also coming out of a period of drift through the summer, right? And if this is the tool that you're pulling out to try to recalibrate,
you mean public drift?
Yeah,
right?
I don't think they were in drift. I think they're working like.
I think they're working their asses off.
No,
that's why
I don't. No, I agree. And to be very clear, I am positive everyone there's working harder than they did under Justin Trudeau. That's not the issue. Yeah. But publicly, it looked like a summer where they were drifting. So they drifted through blowing the deadlines that they set on the Trump negotiation, handing over some of the tariffs, like, so all of this stuff there. And this is the tool that they pulled off the tool shelf to reset, but they didn't actually signal a reset. Yeah. They didn't actually precondition to create the possibility of a reset. And that, I think, should be an alarming sign for them, because now they've done that, right? This is their, yes, okay, it's not an industrial policy. He's calling it an industrial strategy. Fine. But if this is their answer to the recession that's coming, and this is how it's communicated, it's not adequate.
Yeah, I think insofar as you're talking about comms drift, I think that's probably an accurate way of describing it. But one of the big criticisms that we had about the Trudeau group was the absolute absence of advertising and narrative setting. How they got into such deep trouble on the carbon tax, for instance, is they allowed their opponents to do all the marketing and do all the framing.
Mm.
And for all of the criticisms that I and others have had about Poilievre, he's pretty damn good at that. And if they don't get out and frame what they're doing in a more thoughtful and deliberate manner, they're going to get framed by the Conservatives. And I don't think they're going to like where that takes them. Where's the advertising campaign? Like, I bet you in 5 minutes we could write a pretty damn good script for an ad talking about, stormy seas ahead and, unprecedented challenges south of the border, whatever, and how we need to come together. And we are doing A, B, and C to do that. Like, whether it's different parts of the country or but give the basics of what the fuck is going on. Like, they obviously know what it is because Carney can articulate it in a press conference, but he's not doing those every day, and then when it's jammed in with 43 other things, it's not going to get the attention it needs. They need to do the ABCs right here on communications, or they're going to get fucking steamrolled.
The fall session of Parliament starts in about a week. It's pretty exciting for politicos like me. And after a summer of devastating wildfires across the country, smoke in major cities, destruction for many communities, it's clearer than ever. This fall season is a critical time for government to act on climate change, which is causing these events to become more frequent and more severe. In addition to reducing damaging greenhouse gas pollution, good policy will mean more affordable options for Canadians and a more competitive economy. How? Well, our sponsor, the Canadian Climate Institute, is highlighting 5 ways the federal government can make important progress here, this session and beyond. Number 1, strengthening industrial carbon pricing systems. The single policy capable of driving more emissions reduction than any other, but it needs to work as intended, and that means getting under the hood and doing a number of fixes, not least of which is strengthening federal benchmarks for provincial systems. Number 2, enacting Canada's clean electricity tax credit. Clean electricity is cheap and getting cheaper. It's expanding all over the world. Finalizing these tax credits at home will speed Canada's transition. 3, maintain a strong EV availability standard. We saw this last week. The Prime Minister adjusted this policy for Canada's auto sector and started a review. It's important to get this review right because the EV standard is critical for Canada to make progress on emissions and protect competitiveness in a world racing to an EV future. 4, finalizing Canada's oil and gas methane regulations. Canada has made very big strides on methane reduction, but cutting these emissions from oil and gas 75% by 2030 will help Canada meet global standards and create benefits by growing our methane mitigation industry. And 5, applying flood and fire resilience criteria for federally supported housing. We know climate change is supercharging extreme weather disasters like wildfires, and the most affordable home is the one you don't have to rebuild. So when government steers housing and infrastructure to low-hazard areas, it helps keep Canadians safe and saves billions of dollars. Lots on the table here, and the Climate Institute is hopeful for Canadians and our economy. So let the session begin. Go ahead, Scott.
It was a weird retreat, eh? Like by traditional standard, one of the things is there is a machinery and a set of expectations among the 4,000 people that dedicate themselves to working in and following and dealing with all this stuff, right? So as an example, when you have a retreat, a planning forum, a coffee clash, whatever Christ you want to call it, in Toronto, right? Then you would traditionally think, well, then they're going to have a couple of announceables that are Toronto oriented. So you would think housing, you would think crime, right? You would think obviously they've got to do something in and around their macro agenda around the economy and so on and so forth. But you would have thought you would have seen a signature announcement. It started with this Toronto Star exclusive interview with Gregor Robertson. He's talking about housing. And what does he say? He says, the condo market is in free fall and there's a housing bubble. He doesn't finish that by saying, and therefore we're taking the following 4 actions to protect people, the market, and the value of your house. He just says, fuck, that sounds shitty, eh? Sucks.
If only someone was in charge.
And leaves. And so it lands, it it lands like a lead balloon. And so suddenly, what'd you hear from the media? What you heard from the media who were there, the gallery that were there, as soon as that goddamn thing hit on the Star's website, people started getting phone calls saying that ministerial interviews that had been planned for the retreat, sit downs with this minister, that minister, putting them on the show with Vashi, with Dave, that all that got canceled. So they just retreated. And so there were no announcements. There wasn't a meeting with the mayor. There wasn't so it was just strange in its architecture. And you know what? Maybe you want to do it differently. More power to you. But you do it differently by doing it in a different way. You don't do it differently by not doing it at all.
All right, well, let's roll into the clipping because I think the conversation's naturally evolving there. And the clipping is from Shannon Proudfoot in the Globe and Mail. And it actually adds a few logs to the fire. My excerpt's going to be brief because really what she's writing about is she's writing about the presentations to the retreat that were made by the Leger polling company. And the Leger polling company basically told the cabinet that the issue that animated their voters in the election campaign, fear of Donald Trump, has receded significantly. And the overall issue set has returned to the status quo ante what it was before Trump's election, which is fundamentally affordability with some heavy doses these days of crime and immigration. So she says, so the crisis that flipped Canadian politics upside down and caused voters to turn en masse to Mr. Carney and his otherwise reviled party in the spring now feels significantly less pressing to people. And the affordability issues that Mr. Poilievre has been hammering the government with for the past 3 years, to the point where he was loudly criticized for missing the real election campaign, are now at the top of the list again. Whether Mr. Poilievre's steadfastness on this is due to prescience or stubbornness is something I invite you to place wagers on with your friends. But either way, it looks like Mr. Carney will have to write the exam his conservative opponent has been studying for relentlessly. So I don't have access to the Leger polling, but David Coletto, as always, has been sharing his 3 times daily polling results with us. And what he has been showing is that back at the very top of the list is affordability by a mile. And that fear of Trump has receded significantly. It's still in there. It's still in the mix. But fundamentally, people are focused on their own economics much more than the country's economics. And, if you look at the whole, and then if you look at what people think the parties are good at, would do a good job of, the situation's even more stark. And it makes you believe that if you look at the abacus data, and there was an election today, and the leaders were equally perceived, that the Conservatives would win quite handily. And the only difference is that the leaders are not equally perceived. So, Scott, what do you do to protect Carney?
Well, I think it relates. I think this is the same topic in some respects. I love Shannon's writing, but I think this is I think she's expressing a version of what we were just talking about, which is there isn't a clear narrative. Other than I elected this guy and I continue to see this guy as the fellow who was shadowboxing with Trump. But I think that there may be an assumption on the part of the government, and I don't know. It's not like there aren't tons of smart people, so they may not all make this assumption. But I think there might be a generic assumption, a default assumption that as the economy worsens, people will connect that to Trump and to the tariffs, and they will say, now this is we are finally seeing the consequence of this. We blame it on Trump. Therefore, we don't blame Carney. Therefore, all the goodness of having the comfort that people have with respect to Carney in terms of dealing with Trump, especially relative to Poilievre, will translate into that arena. And I'm not sure that you can make that assumption. And so I think they have got to get more street level. I think there's defense and offense. I think on defense, they've got to start to make moves on crime to protect their flank there. I think, and we heard Carney say, listen, we are thinking about coming forward with criminal code amendments. So I'm not surprised by that. So I think they need to.
What I heard him say was that he agrees with Doug Ford.
Yes, I believe that
Yeah.
was right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, you guys may have forgotten about the campfire, but I don't think Doug and Carney have, right? I mean, that was a summer loving, had me a blast, and I don't think it's out of their minds just yet. But
Happens
so
so
you got to do that.
fast.
But then offensively, I think you've got to you've got to start to translate. It's always awkward because no one wants to talk about a weakening economy, but you've got to actually talk about what this means for people at the kitchen table, workaday economics, and you have to start to make the connection between the economic pain that people are feeling or the anxiety that they're beginning to harbor and the actions of Trump. You got to say the problem is Trump. This is the connection, and here's why we're doing X, Y, and Z. But it's got to be very street level. So that's where you got to be on offense on the economy. You got to be on defense a little bit, I think, on crime. And I'll leave immigration. If for no other reason, I'm not sure that I've got my fat head wrapped around that issue and exactly how it's going to play out just yet, but I'll leave it aside. I think doing something on crime defensively is really an imperative.
Nature has always been part of Canada's story, and for nearly 2 decades, it's been part of a successful federal partnership too. The Natural Heritage Conservation Program has helped protect critical forests, grasslands, wetlands, and shorelines across the country. It's conserved 2,200 natural areas that combined represent 1.5 times the size of Prince Edward Island. Put another way, that's about 900 hockey rinks worth of nature every day since 2007. Program partners like the Nature Conservancy of Canada have rallied landowners, companies, foundations, other levels of government, and people like you to match every federal dollar with another too. This has resulted in more than $1.5 billion invested in nature, securing lasting benefits for species, people, and communities. Benefits like clean air and water, flood protection, food security, job creation, and economic livelihoods, all while protecting places to hike, swim, paddle, and fish for today and future generations. As Canada looks ahead, it's worth remembering what's working for us now. Learn more by visiting natureconservancy.ca/NHCP. Kory, how would you protect Carney's leadership advantage given how critical it is to the Liberal positioning?
Well, some of the things that Scott just talked about, but I think his friend is going to be talking more about the problem, to be more predictive as to where this is going and why, and what we're going to do to try to put our economy in a more protected position. But make no mistake, we are going to have the mother of all recessions, and it's going to be because of tariffs and the disruptions that we're seeing. And we're going to have to pivot, entire industries and sectors of our economy quickly if we want to maintain anything close to the standard of living we have right now. So I would be laying out the case and bringing lens back to those big issues. How you maintain credibility is by getting there first. But if you do what Biden did and what Trudeau did, which is to try to gaslight the public that things are better than they are, or allow your opponents to take up all the space on those issues, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Like I think the first 2/3 of the election campaign, they were doing well. The Liberal campaign was doing well, being focused on those things. And then when they went into this sort of mishmash of other issues and bullshit, they blew it. And and they have the ability to do that again on this. This is big stuff. It's coming at us very quickly. You got to communicate more on crime. Like I don't know. I live at the corner of fentanyl and meth, Dundas Square. It ain't great out there right now, and everybody knows it ain't great. And we've seen high profile home invasions and people getting shot and really not good stuff.
After
In
our
the
last
media.
week's show, Kory, I got an email from a friend who said, Kory is so right about crime. He said, I was carjacked at knife point in my driveway last Thursday afternoon with my kids in
Jesus.
the driveway. Right?
Unbelievable.
Like, it's crazy.
Well, but one of the things that you see in common in a lot of these cases and the guy was on bail. He was out on bail. It's like we are never going to make any progress on crime if we keep letting the fucking bad guys out.
Are there
Like
jail cells for them? Let me ask, does
there
anybody
are
know the
jail
answer to this?
cells.
I don't know the
There
Are there jail cells for them?
I do know the answer for Ontario because I follow it pretty closely. Not only are there jail cells, there's a capacity to have a lot more jail cells because the thing that, would allow us to do that is not more physical infrastructure, it's just hiring more guards. Like, there are wings of prisons that are vacant right now, and there's lots of room to do it. And I would suggest we should take a page out of Alberta's book and work on drug treatment inside prisons. And I think there are a bunch of smart things that'll be done, but you can only do them if you actually keep the bad guys in jail. And that's not happening right now. And this is not some sleeper issue that just came up. Like we've been talking about this for years. And so I'm glad that there's bail reform coming this fall. Let's see what that looks like, but it better not be the mamby-pamby bullshit that we got from the Trudeau government, because their form of bail reform was to basically ensure that everyone gets bail no matter what. But yeah, huge issue. I think we're talking about immigration later, so I'll maybe leave my thoughts on that. But like one more thing from Coletto's polling that I thought was pretty interesting. When you look at what's at the very bottom of the list, at 3%, Indigenous reconciliation. And when you look at climate change in the environment, it's at 16%, way down at the bottom too. If they go to the sort of Trudeau narrative stuff, which I think part of their cabinet wants to default to, and part of their staff wants to default to, they are on the thinnest of thin ice. You can't abandon all of the top issues to the other side. Like this was basically my critique of Poilievre during the campaign. You can't, ignore the number one and number two issue and get elected. And you can't, in the case of Carney, ignore the top issues and stay elected.
They are, if you look at Coletto's numbers, Kory, the key is jobs.
Yes.
The key is jobs, right? The Liberals are going to lose cost of living, and they can't do anything about it. They just are going to lose cost of living. They need to be more competitive on it. But they don't have to lose the jobs argument, even though it's a recession. They don't have to lose the jobs, and they can't lose every economic argument. And right now, they are losing every economic argument.
That's why last week should have been a
Trump.
plan about protecting jobs and creating jobs.
But there was,
it wasn't.
for example, there
It
was
ended up
no
being an EV
framing.
mandate
There was no
announcement.
framing in that announcement about job creation. None.
Right.
Like no explicit story in there about what this was going to do to help backfill the losses that we're experiencing right now. A missed opportunity, right? I mean, I would add my advice. Like
it has to be inspiring. There has to be a hope element to all this messaging, right? I mean, Churchill didn't say we're going to get creamed in the oceans, we're going to get creamed in the beaches, we're going to get creamed. He said we're going to fight. It's going to be horrible, and then at the end, we're going to win.
And look, there's a reason it's storytelling, okay? And that is an element that's missing. And I think that it's very clear that, as I talked about before, Carney loves himself a good policy fix and that he is driving a lot of this. But it is just not enough to have the smart policies that they think are going to be stimulative or that they think are going to fill these gaps or whatever. There's got to be some scaffolding of storytelling around it, and they have to look at what the impacts are going to be at the household level and tell that story and have something to say about what this is going to do to help, yes, with job creation, but also like they can't cede on affordability. They need to fight on that terrain as well. And they have to be talking about that. And truly, I think that one of the single best things that they could do internally to orient themselves a little bit better is stop telling themselves the story inside that government that this is a completely different government from the Trudeau government, because they are holding that out like a shield as though anybody in Canada understands that it's a complete differentiation, right? So I know they are trying to cut ties. They are trying to send signals that they are ending the Trudeau era. And we've talked a lot about that. But the point is that the negatives that the Liberal government had on issues of affordability, on things at the household level, remain. And the story that they're telling themselves about being an entirely new government is blinding them to that weakness. Because Carney, though he may have walked on water during the campaign, did not come ready-made with a solution to connect with voters on that issue. And he's not providing one now. And so for the staff around him and for the people in that office, you have to stop saying that as an excuse for bad storytelling, for not fully connecting your policies to people's lives. It is going to fucking kill your government.
You know, there's a rhythm to this time of year. Parliament sits, schools open, calendars fill, and inboxes, well, those start filling up too. Some of it's junk, some of it's scams, and some of it is sophisticated enough to fool just about anyone. Scammers have not slowed down. The tactics are sharper and more convincing than ever. Phishing texts, fake job offers, investment fraud that looks like the real deal. That's why Canada's banks are taking scam prevention seriously. They're working with law enforcement. They're among more than 50 organizations across the public and private sectors to protect Canadians from scams. And banks offer free, easy to understand resources to help Canadians recognize the warning signs. Banks know how hard people work to build savings or grow a business, and how quickly that can be taken away by one convincing scam. Whether you're protecting your parents, your kids, or yourself, education is the first line of defense. For the essential information on how to spot scams and stay safe online, visit cba.ca/scams.
Well, affordability is not nearly as important as jobs. Like, and if you're looking at the anxiety that people feel in relative terms, saying I'm worried about the price of eggs and the price of gasoline and all of that, is not the same as I'm worried that that I'm going to be unemployed.
Yeah,
It
I
is
agree.
it is an entirely different level of anxiety around that, and that's what's coming at us. Like affordability is going to be a distant happy memory compared to what's coming if we're in a deep recession and we're dealing with major job losses. So you got to start positioning for that. And I think, at its core, the things that had the Liberals win in terms of comparative strength of resume and credibility on the economy overall. Carney has all of the building blocks to maintain a lead on those things if they communicate.
Yeah.
And if they
But, like,
don't, doesn't matter.
Let's look at what Carney said last week about the budget, which we know is going to be a difficult and painful budget. This is a budget of austerity and investment. What the fuck does that mean, guys? Like, that is an extremely difficult message to carry off. And it doesn't mean anything to the bulk of the public, except people in Quebec who exactly understand what austerity means and don't like it. So the preconditioning that's happening for this
We're going
budget
to cut
that
waste
is,
and invest in jobs.
sure, okay, but that's
Right,
not what they're
exactly.
saying, right? That's not the story that is being told to precondition this budget that is going to have these difficult choices. And they're running out of time for that. So I think that all of the signs point to a real need for them to focus on some kind of narrative that provides people a pathway out of this awful situation that we're in, but also makes clear what the stakes are. Because I think the public, in so much as everybody right now is broadly in support of the priorities that the Carney government has had, the choices have not been made clear. Like, it's not clear what is not going to happen because of, for example, very large defense investment. And this is going to hit like a ton of bricks when the budget comes down unless they very carefully precondition it.
I used to, I started doing News Talk 1010 and the whole Bell Media radio network about 14 years ago. And I would go on there, especially like in the early days, and I would say like, okay, so there's going to be a federal budget, so let's talk about this. And I start talking, and station manager, brand managers, I called him, would call me, and he would say, street level. And I'd be like, what? And he'd go, street level. Like, no one gives a fuck about the way you're talking about this. So, like, if I was going to write something on the walls of PMO, I would be saying street level, like government. Look at the procurement piece of that announcement that day. So the narrative around it was, we're going to have a genuine Canada strong, buy Canada policy. Right now, some of the rules and regulations around procurement require you to consider buying Canadian, but you're not obligated. We're going to now make it an obligation to. And that was the end of the story. And you're like, no, that shouldn't be the end of the story. It should be, we should be saying things like, because if we're our own best and biggest customer, then that means people will be buying steel from the Sioux, and that will keep the line open from 11 to 7. The third line will be going at the plant. And that means that you'll be able to keep your job and pay your mortgage and send your kid to camp. And that's the fucking point of it all. Protect the jobs and build the jobs. And so it's just taking it like that. It's Get street level, guys. And there need to be voices in the PMO that are constantly screaming that at one another, at the ministers. And some days, as uncomfortable as it is to look across the desk at his glaring, piercing eyes, to the prime minister.
All right, let's move on to our last topic, which is something's changed over the course of this pod. Years ago, in the ancient days, we used to talk about how there was a consensus in Canada on immigration policy and how there was a bipartisan consensus and it wasn't political. And wow, what a wonderful thing it was that all political parties in Canada agreed that immigration was a good thing for Canada, that Canada was stronger because of it, and we should keep doing it. Well, that broke. That broke over the last 4 or 5 years in a big way. But it didn't break in a way that caused the opposition to actually pick it up as a political cudgel until this past week. And this was the week when Pierre Poilievre decided that things had changed enough that you could call for the cancellation of the temporary foreign workers program, which is, let's be clear, a way into talking about the whole issue. It isn't just a discrete policy area. It opens up the whole how many foreigners are there in this country and what should we do about it discussion. Jordan, what were you thinking as you saw that?
Well, I mean, as you know, it's something I've been harping on for a while. And I think in the context of what we've seen in Europe on this debate, this is a hugely powerful and dangerous topic to have societal schisms on. And that's, to be clear, that's very much what we're beginning to see here. I don't think this is the first time Poilievre has done it. We've seen him actually tap on this button a number of times since the campaign. You might remember in the summer where he talked about we need less people coming into Canada,
That's true.
for example.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So I would see this in the vein of
Wasn't
those.
really paying attention to him in the summer, Jordan.
I understand. I understand the temptation. But look, I mean, this is really, it's pretty diabolical politically, and it's going to be effective. And I think that there is reason for everybody in Canada to be worried about that. What it does is it lets him, and particularly on this specific topic, it lets him dabble in those anti-immigrant sentiments and in a way kind of pit newcomers against young workers. And like that's a fight that that he clearly sees a lot of benefit in. And when you look at, for example, the young men that he's been able to mobilize and recruit into becoming really a new vote base for the Conservatives, he's absolutely right. And I think that what we have seen and what is dangerous about this is that there's always been, particularly over the last couple of years, concerns about the immigration system and whether it's the right levels and balance and mix. And what was really missing until now is a party that was willing to strike a match and light that on fire into a political issue. And he is clearly playing with the matchbook right now and striking. And I think that the challenge on this, and there's traps that he's laid in this for other parties that are, again, like very diabolical, very politically clever. So the thing is he's not wrong about some of the critiques of the temporary foreign workers program. Since the pandemic, it was widely opened up at the demand of business in order to bring in cheaper labor, predominantly into the service industry. So we're not just talking about agriculture workers, we're talking about the Tim Hortons, we're talking about, all of those types of workplaces. And it does have a track record of feeding exploitation of these workers who come into Canada. All of those things are true. And the trap for the Liberals and for Carney is to go out and to defend the system as it is, which we saw him waltz right into on Friday when he was asked about this. His response was basically, well, business has asked for these temporary foreign workers. And it's like, yeah, that's the fucking problem, right? So Carney is allowing himself to be pushed into defending businesses in this and giving Poilievre the space to be on the side of young workers who he's positioning as the victims of this program, right? Now, and I think that there's also a trap for the NDP, which is defending the temporary foreign workers program as it is. That is also not I think the right demand. The program's exploitive. It does push down wages for Canadian workers. And it's also not, for progressives, like this is not the gold standard of what we want from the immigration system. There's always been a saying that if people are good enough to come here to Canada to work, and there's a need for them to work these jobs, then there should be a process where they are good enough to come here to stay. And I think that something that particularly Liberals and New Democrats, but really anyone who is concerned with maintaining some sort of a consensus in Canada around immigration, like we have to think about what is it that we can do to protect the integrity within the public sphere, within public opinion, the integrity of the immigration system as a whole. And Poilievre's attacks are smart, right? Because they go on the edge, they go for the weakest parts of the system where there's clearly problems. But what happens is it sours the public on immigration writ large. And it feeds into concerns writ large about immigration, about permanent immigration.
So did he do that, Jordan? Did he do that, or did the Liberals do that?
Yeah, I think the Liberals did
because
it.
I am.
I think the Liberals set the table for sure. Like
I don't
they
know how
allowed the situation to be created where we had massive spikes in temporary foreign workers, massive spikes in student visas that were just not sustainable. And those were done for reasons other than protecting the integrity of the whole immigration system. And that created a door for these guys to walk through and tap into that anti-immigrant sentiment. But the bad news is that despite the fact that the Liberals went, more than a year ago and said, okay, we're closing off all of these things and we're dialing down numbers and that has not penetrated the public. This issue is still something that is moving people, and it's an issue that Poilievre has managed to carve out as one of his own, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. And I think that what he's done here is really it's troubling and it's very effective. So it's something that each party really has to think about how they're going to counter, not just politically, but in the interests of protecting that broader consensus around immigration in Canada wherever we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Scott, that I don't know how the Liberals clean this up in a way that makes people comfortable, because it seems to have had so many impacts. I mean, we have the temporary foreign workers, competing for and suppressing wages at a time that we're losing jobs. I mean, maybe if you've got a growing and expanding economy, that's politically sustainable, but not in a shrinking economy. And we seem overall, between the students and the regular immigration and refugees and temporary foreign workers, to just have absorbed so many more people than we could accommodate, either physically, whether it's in terms of shelter or hospitals, or intellectually, in terms of, becoming part of the Canadian sort of stream. Requires, I think, a certain management of the flow of immigrants. And I mean, are we, what do you think you can do to turn that around from a story perspective? Because, God, the Coletto polling on it is terrible, both in terms of its importance and also in terms of where the Liberals stand on it.
Well, I have a thought, but before I get to it, I just want to echo what you guys are saying. This scares the living bejesus out of me. 2 weeks ago, I took the kids to Mexico for a vacation. Arrived late at night on the first night, rushed into a restaurant before they closed their doors so the kids could get something to eat, sat down at a table that was already occupied. Fellow next to me turns, introduces himself. He says, I'm from Britain, starts talking to me. And without inquiring what I do for a living or anything, he volunteers that things have gotten really bad in Britain, that the United Kingdom is overrun with immigrants, and it's really hollowing out the sense of the nation, economic opportunity. Young people can't find a job. Like, I was like, hi, I'm Scott. I'm from Toronto. That was it. And this guy just lets loose. Now, maybe he's just, House of Lords bigot who always hated any change.
No, but Britain's bad.
When this stuff, my point, I think, is when this argument takes root, it can go deep and it can go fast. And so I'm really worried about it being unleashed. And I'm not surprised. It does not surprise me at all that Poilievre would be willing to unleash it. It fits perfectly within the narrative that he's been pursuing and the issue set that he follows. I think it has taken some deliberate choosing on his part to not go there in a more forceful way prior. And now I think he's decided he's all in on it. And I think the critical element of
Which means
responding
it's
to
now
this.
so pervasive. It's now so pervasive that you can have that position and not lose the 905.
That's right. Well,
That's right.
not
Right.
even,
Yeah.
or the 416. I think he looks at that and he says, I'm no longer, I think I can pursue this issue, provided I show some skill and focus without worrying about my votes in Scarborough. And he may well be right. In fact, he's probably right.
Yep.
So to me, the critical thing for the government when it comes to composing response to this is there are two big ways you can go about it. You can say he's bad, or you can say he's wrong. And he's wrong is the right way to go. Because if you say he's bad for raising these issues and he's bad for making these arguments, then you take it into a
You're
world
bad.
where you'll defend the status quo, you'll accept all of it. It's almost like you're conceding all of the arguments he makes, but you're saying he should be ashamed of wearing it. And then you're into an argument that I think you may not like how it unfolds. But if you can make the argument of you're goddamn right, in a tough economic time, we need to refine, retune, constantly be retooling these kinds of programs. But understand, the problem isn't a guy who comes in for 6 weeks to pick fruit in Niagara. The problem is we're not creating enough jobs for people who are 27, 28, 29 that pay well and that are going to be there for those people. And that's where you have to get to the core of the problem. What he's unlocking is the fear of those people who are that age and the parents of the people who are that age, that their economic opportunities are being demolished. And you've got to have a response to that. But if you just go to the reflex liberal place of saying he's wrong for even raising this, he's bad for raising this, then you may not like the way this debate unfolds. You may find yourself on a crushing side of a popular opinion debate.
I don't think I agree entirely with what you're saying there, Scott, in the sense that I don't think it's a lot different than where you've seen Kearney have success on economic issues. You don't just say it's okay to raise it. You actually get there first and you agree. And there are places in this debate where I think it's very fucking easy to agree. In fact, I actually think in the dying days of even the Trudeau government, you saw Miller go there and start making the changes. But like not talking about it and not doing anything is I think the most dangerous place on the field. When you talk about the politics in the 905 and in places like Scarborough, look, you go to Brampton, and the place you're going to find the most acute examples of this are there, and the people who are the most upset about it are new immigrants who've come in through some of the more historic paths to coming to the country, who are seeing people who let's just put it bluntly, who shouldn't have ever been let in. They were let in to be a part of fake colleges, to get fake diplomas, in numbers that were 3x what our entire immigration system allowed into the country in a year. It's when you look at where the foreign student numbers tapped out, like you had 750,000 people coming in. It's insane. And so to say that you're going to have a housing problem and a youth unemployment problem at the end of that is as obvious as the nose on your face for most people, including most, quote, new Canadians. So like you got to get there first, and you got to actually take this on in a serious way. It is a serious issue. And I think Poilievre's on the right track politically in terms of going after it, and the way you defeat that is to get there first and take some of the air out of that balloon.
So does Carney or somebody need to give a big Aaron Sorkin-ish speech about immigration and where mistakes have been made honestly and where mistakes have not been made, or where what is a legitimate criticism and what is not a legitimate criticism, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, like I think it's so easy to do. We let in a bunch of people on false pretenses, some of whom are a victim of what I think is fraud in terms of, hey, you come here and you're going to get this degree and you're going to be able to stay and you're going to have a great job. None of those things were true. That's fraud committed on the person who was coming into the country. And then there was fraud for people who were coming in without any intention of ever getting a diploma or a degree. And the idea was to get here and then make a false refugee claim. Like it's so, there's a problem with all of that. But the framing on this, I don't think is much different than our earlier conversation. It's around jobs. It's around cost of living pressures. If you look at where the cost overruns for the hospital system in Ontario, for instance, they're almost entirely related to this. When you look at pressures on housing in places like Peel region, it's almost entirely a result of this. So, you can call out, where the problems are and where, how this has to change. Temporary foreign worker thing, it's maybe a little more complex. Like, I'm not sure I have much criticism for certain aspects of that. I think, when it comes to picking fruit seasonally and things like that, unless you want to have food prices so high that you kill all of those jobs, you're going to have temporary foreign workers. But that doesn't mean, to Jordan's point, that everybody working at Tim Hortons has to be from the Philippines. Like it's, I think that program was abused too, and grew well beyond where I think the legitimate need for it existed.
I mean, what's unique here is that the government already has made the policy pivot, right, on this, but they have not told a story around it. And I think that it's not just about having a narrative around immigration that is honest and responds to some of the domestic concerns and tries to protect the overall integrity of permanent immigration to Canada. But it's also about how does this government connect with or express empathy for young workers who can't find a job. And those don't necessarily need to be tied together, but that second thing hasn't happened really from this government at all. And they are leaving the field open to Poilievre to shape that narrative the way he wants to. And guess what, guys? The way he wants to is this like xenophobic pitting people who are newcomers against young workers. And that's where he's fishing. So they cannot leave that terrain open to him if they want to effectively counter it. It's got to be, you have to be able to speak to that as well.
In fairness, I don't think he's being xenophobic. Like I don't get that in what he's saying. I actually think he's saying something quite close to you. Like what was his pitch on the temporary foreign worker program? It's that that you don't need to do this, and they're doing it because they want to pay people less.
Yeah,
and
I do think he is tapping
it's actually a very NDP.
Well, he's touching the rail. I don't think he's saying anything wrong. He's touching the rail.
Yeah.
He's inviting it. The other thing he's doing is he's inviting his opponents to fight this on the wrong territory and give him a gift.
That's the trap.
I would just say, David, I liked your prescription. I like the way you described that speech that should be made, but it actually needs to be accompanied by concrete measures as well and a persistence. But I don't like the Aaron Sorkin reference because that I go back to, and I know you were just being glib, but like I mean,
because I fucking hate Sorkin, and let's be clear about that.
But fucking liberals, man, like we have got to be so careful. Like we do not have far to go to reach the high part of the high horse, right? And so it's so critical. Like you do that sort of Jed Bartlett. Listen, while we're talking about this issue, by the way, all of you have limited vocabularies and even worse even worse values. We just can't go to that place, or you might as well just deliver all those young votes straight to Poilievre in a basket.
Right. All right, Mr. Pinsent, can you please assemble the accursed for our Hey Yous?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, Jordan, I'm picking on you.
Okay. Well, I will. I want to say something about Ken Dryden as well first, but it's not my Hey You. Reserve the right. So I crossed paths with Ken a few times when he was on the Hill, and I think what really struck me overwhelmingly was what a warm and nice person he is, and that, as you will all know, is something of a rarity on the Hill. And I think the work that he did in terms of laying some of the groundwork on the childcare agreements was so significant in terms of ultimately getting that done. And he did that, for lack of a better word, at a time when that wasn't cool, when that was something that was only going to be feasible in the dying days of the government. And he took it on earnestly, and he took it on seriously, and he took it on with commitment. And so I think that there are now many, many, many thousands of Canadian families who are benefiting in part because of that work. So that's a hey you to Ken. My second hey you is to whoever the fuck in the PMO thought it was a good idea to invite Kevin Roberts from the Heritage Foundation to the cabinet retreat. we've talked a lot today about the lack of a narrative around some of these choices that the government is making. And I think that this is such an illustrative example of this. Um, this government is going out of its way, not just to ignore its left flank, but to fucking piss them off. And this is, yeah, that's right. This was a straight middle finger at anybody who falls left of center, not just New Democrat voters, but anybody in the Liberal Party who falls left of center. What was the purpose of this? What message did it send? Is there some
Are you
thought-
of the view that a right of center Canadian is a Project 2025 person?
Well, well, there is certainly potentially a small pocket of them that are.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
But like,
I'm just saying they offended more people than you're
most
suggesting.
of them are not, right?
Right.
And like, what is the get from this? Like, do we really think that like a more deep understanding of a guy who is effectively endorsing like violent authoritarianism in the United States is going to give us some kind of an edge in the trade negotiation? There was no way that the juice was ever going to be worth the squeeze on this invitation. And this stuff is dumb. Like, you really, really have to think about what the message is going to be externally when you make choices like this. And then to cap it all off, it wasn't even that the government canceled on him in the end. He got to pull the plug because he didn't want to hang out with the woke lefties in Canada. So like 0 out of 10, complete fail. And that is my hey you to the government this week.
Awesome. All right. Kory?
I'm going to send my hey you to Paul Wells. I've really enjoyed his podcast while it's been on, and he's decided that he's going to get out of the podcasting world and make more space for writing. And I just wanted to say, hey, Paul, I really enjoyed your podcast. I think you're a really talented guy in that medium, and I hope David invites you on his show, and other people do the same, because I think you've got a lot to contribute in this space, and gonna miss your pod.
You know, podcasting is a grimy, dirty world. It's not fit for somebody like Paul.
It's yeah, it's no
Right.
good, man. It's like laying down in traffic. Look at us.
Scott, I'm going to go before you because I'm going to let
You
you
bet.
back clean up on this. I just want to say, because I said stuff at the beginning, my hey you obviously goes out to Ken, and I'm going to try to hold it together. 22 years ago, John Turner called me. He said he'd been talking to Ken Dryden, and he thought that Ken Dryden might be interested in running under Paul Martin. And a group of us trooped off to the Air Canada Centre, to the Toronto Maple Leaf offices, to meet with Ken. And that led to the most wonderful 20-year friendship, where I got to hang out with the smartest, most compassionate guy, have him come on my podcast anytime I wanted, go to hockey games with, eat cheeseburgers with, talk about politics, talk about Canada, talk about hockey. It was just fucking wonderful, and I miss him already. So, hey, you, Ken Dryden, great man.
Well
For
said.
sure. I mean, yeah, try to hold it together. We were so lucky to get to know him. Like, and you know, David, you were closer, but I was very fortunate to work with him closely. And a lot of our time since politics, since the government, we got to spend it all together. A lot of my best memories of Ken in the last 15 years have been
This shirt's from the sweater retirement, from the jersey retirement. You and I were there together.
Fantastic. Like what a night. So we got to go there when he raised his banner at the Bell Center. That was some evening. You know, they say don't meet your heroes. He was a good hero to meet. I know there are endless stories about what a kind and generous, sincere, humble person Ken was. And he was all of those things, written about that stuff, talked about it on TV the last couple of days. I want to give a small, quick story about one time when I saw him annoyed, because I think it also tells you something about the guy. The three of us were at a game. David, we went to see the Habs were in Toronto, so the three of us went to see the Leafs game. I think it was the first time he'd taken us to a game, and so we were sitting there, and we're just out in the crowd, right? So people, first of all, people are fuckstruck that all-time great Ken Dryden, former president of the Leafs, right? All-time great Hab is there, like sitting just like with two washed up losers and them, right? And so people are like looking around, as we get settled in, they're like, is that really him? Is that really him? But then, of course, the obvious thing happens, which is that people realize it is Ken Dryden, and they come up and they start asking for autographs, which natural. And so people are sitting there and they're like, and some people would have like show up at that game and they've got a Dryden jersey. So a guy comes up and he's asking. And so Ken would sit there dutifully and he would take their felt markers and he would say, well, he'd ask for their name. And so then he would write their name and sign it. And I see him do this every time someone approaches him. He says, may I ask your name? Okay, great. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Alice. And he would write it. And then somebody came up and flung a bunch of pictures, 2, 3, 4 pictures, famous picture of him with the pose, with his leaning on his stick. And just sign your name, sign your name. And you could see him stiffen and he turned them away. And he told us that his policy was, right, that, for some kid, who grew up loving him, some middle-aged slob who grew up loving him, he would sign stuff endlessly. But if it's one of these vultures that are going to be eBaying his name and image, right, he had no time for those people. And, in a funny way, politics, if you think about it, right, like, and I don't mean the people you meet and the voters, but the people you work around and the people you work against, a lot of them are the kinds of fucking slobs who just want you to sign it without personalizing, right? There's a lot of those people in politics. There's a lot of those people that don't put your name. I'm going to actually make something out of this. I'm going to flip this into value. And so I just think, his decency, his sincerity, his humility, his intellect, God, he was a beautiful writer. So I even on the rare occasions when he got annoyed or angry or grumpy, it was for the most decent of reasons.
Yeah. All right. Lots of memories, lots of stories to be told yet. Okay. Thank you all for being here today and doing this. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsors, CN, the Canadian Climate Institute, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and the Canadian Bankers Association, and all of you accursed who listen to all those ads. Appreciate it very much, and we'll see you next week with more of the Curse of Politics. In the meantime, take care of yourselves.